The photograph you see on the screens on your screen right now was taken on July 4th, 1969, the day before Mboya was assassinated. You can see the man there very confidently striding across the tarmac at the then Embakasi International Airport. We had just landed from a conference in Addis Ababa. I guess he had a lot of reason to be confident that at least his life was not in very immediate danger. Because I have not mentioned this, I omitted to mention this, but there had been an early attempt on his life. A policeman actually just fired into his car, but Mboya was not in the car. My guess is that his intelligence had already informed him of the intention, and he was not there, he was not where he was supposed to be to catch that bullet. So I guess things like this would have only served to increase Mboya's confidence, despite the tricky situation he was in at the moment. Or rather at that moment when all this was unfolding. The next day was Saturday, July 5th, 1969. And in those days the government worked. So Mboya worked in the office in the morning. Indeed, he must have had a copy of the Standard, or rather he had a copy of the Standard, where the photograph we've just seen was on the front page of him getting back into the country. Obviously those who were trailing him had vast resources. But were they thin on resources, they would have already known through the newspaper that the man they had their eyes on was already back in the country, and the operation was a go. Now I've been to the scene at Chinese Chemist on Moi Avenue, just where today is Commonwealth House. There's a chemist right next, and that's where Chinese Chemist was. And if you look at the area, it's a very interesting area. Right across the road, there's Hilton Hotel. Actually, from one of the windows of the Hilton Hotel, you can have a very clear view of the chemist. Okay, it might be slightly obscured now by trees, but at that time, I've examined photographs of the time, it had a very clear view. So it would have been the perfect place maybe for a sniper to take a shot. But it looks like these people didn't want to take a chance. They wanted to make sure. So Mboya comes out of his office, releases his driver, releases his bodyguard, and starts making his way to the chemist to buy some ointment. He had a skin problem apparently, and the ointment used to really help in easing a kind of skin rash somewhere on his body. Now let's zoom into an eyewitness account, somebody who's actually on the scene on that day. This is a report that has even been published in the local Daily Nation. And let's just look at it word for word, because there's something very interesting in this particular eyewitness report that tallies with a theory that I've had for many years. Here's the eyewitness report. As we were talking, two men stood about 2 steps from where I was, with their backs facing each other. The one whose face I could see was wearing a tweed grey coat, and he was thin and tall. His main focus was a pharmacy where customers were walking in and out regularly. The other man, who was shorter, wore an American khaki jacket with tight wrists and waist. He stood with his hands akimbo. I could see part of his face, Mwangi said when he revisited the scene recently. As he and his friend were about to leave, the shorter man turned as if to walk away, with his right hand covered by his jacket and facing the direction of the pharmacy. 2 gunshots rang just as Mwangi turned his head, only to see a dark-skinned man lying at the doorstep of the pharmacy, being pulled inside. The 2 men who had been standing near him left the scene, running in different directions. So one thing that eyewitness report does is it establishes the fact that there were 2 gunmen at the scene of the assassination. Why have 2 gunmen? Well, I'm told by security experts that sometimes assassination is not a very easy thing. And sometimes somebody sent to do a job can hesitate, get cold feet. I mean, it's a person you're killing. No matter how experienced it happens, and they can freeze at the wrong moment, and then the assassination is a failure. And as we've already seen, this was one assassination that could not go wrong. Because had it gone wrong, it would have brought down the Kenyatta government. No doubt about that. So we can already see there are 2 gunmen. But I want to draw your attention to the second gunman, or rather the second person identified at the scene, who was shorter. and is described he was wearing an American khaki jacket with tight wrists. I have very strong evidence and very strong reason to believe that that second man was none other than Ben Gedhi. Yes, the former police commissioner. Now, Ben Gedhi was a very highly trained person, mostly an explosive expert, but he was also quite handy with a pistol, or rather a revolver. Gedhi was trained in Israel amongst other places, and I believe that Gedhi was the person who fired those 2 shots that killed Tom Mboya. Gedhi then headed the GSU, the General Service Unit, which was actually a protective paramilitary unit, which was a presidential guard. Yeah, the GSU. Well, still is, because we have squads like the dreaded Wrecker Squad, which is part of GSU. GSU has always camouflaged its real intention and its real objectives. Anyway, that's a story for another day. So Ben Gedhi was a man on the scene, the shot a man, and is a man who pulled the trigger and fired those 2 shots that killed Tom Mboya. Indeed, in the assassination that followed, in the major government assassination that followed in 1979, that one of JM Kariuki, Ben Gedhi was very heavily involved. Ben Gedhi was really mtu wa mkono, was the person on the scene who handled a lot of these sensitive assassinations at the time. And I believe they would not have trusted anybody else on the scene other than him to make sure that the job is done. Even more evidence to prove that it must have been Ben Gedhi on the scene was the person they picked to blame for the shooting, a person called Njenga. Now, if you look at Njenga's face properly and you compare to that of Ben Gedhi, they have a resemblance, a very close resemblance, meaning that if there was any eyewitnesses of the scene that might have gotten their eyes on Ben Gedhi, it would have been very easy to call them and they would identify Njenga as the man they saw on the scene. Very neat, nothing could go wrong. This was foolproof, a very well organized operation, probably planned for months, and every detail had been taken care of so that there would be no possible way that this would be traced back to the government. The first doctor on the scene said that he could not trace any pulse, but he said Mboya was still alive, barely, and he was rushed to hospital while being given first aid. And on arrival to hospital, shortly after arrival to hospital, he was pronounced dead. Now let's back up a bit. What had happened to Mboya's information? What had happened to Mboya's intelligence? We should have been able to inform him well in advance. Don't go to Chinese chemists because they're lying in wait for you there. There's a planned assassination. Or even before that, should have told him, stay in Addis Ababa, stay out of the country for a while until things cool off. These guys have an assassination in the works. Just like he had been warned many other times before. What really went wrong this time? There can only be one explanation. And that explanation points very clearly to the CIA. Yeah? The Mboya, unfortunately, had become dispensable. The thinking probably was they could work with the Jomo Kenyatta. He was firmly in authority. He had a government that was working. And the interests of the American people would be served without Mboya being in the way. So, and then the fact also that he had already been identified. Too many people knew who he was working for now. It was just only logical that they would give their nod for this kind of operation to go on. Now remember something. If the Americans were still fully backing Mboya, there's no way the government of Kenya would have gotten away with this assassination without even as much as a protest or a complaint from the American government. They were just silent. They were just quiet about the whole thing. And of course the whole thing was choreographed and orchestrated and organized so well that there was already a fall guy who was accused of the murder. His trial went on for a few months. He was sentenced to die. He appealed. The appeal failed. He was sentenced to die. So end of story. Very neat. But the truth is, the Americans let down the asset at the last minute. And it was not, Mboya was not the first, neither will he be the last asset of a major intelligence unit who is dispensed with in a most brutal, cruel way when they have already served their purpose. But James Kanyotu's operation was not over. there was still one loose end to be tied. Yeah, and in the next recording, we shall see how that loose end was tied. Incidentally, James Kanyoto was one very interesting character. No newspaper had a photograph of him. He was a real spy chief. In fact, the only time the public got to see him was many years later, in the late 80s. In fact, early 90s, when the Goldenberg scandal came to play, and he was called to testify. That's when, for the first time since independence, Kenyans were able to get a glimpse on what James Kanyoto looks like. Anyway, that's it for now. This is Chris Kumekucha. Look forward to the next recording, which will be out shortly. Thank you. Bye.